West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
I'll tell you something. Somebody said to me, Alina, would you rather be smart or pretty? And I said, oh, easy. Pretty. I can fake being smart.
Whenever I do a video on Donald Trump missing a key legal deadline or making a massive legal blunder, I always like to share that video that I led with there because it's a perfect exemplar about what MAGA is all about. And now Donald Trump missed a key deadline to file a petition for certiorari, or an appeal, with the United States Supreme Court following the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals decision in the Blassingame case. This was the civil lawsuit filed against Donald Trump, with other cases consolidated with it, that alleged that Donald Trump was responsible for injuries and emotional distress damages and other misconduct relating to the January 6th insurrection. But recall that the Blassingame case was the civil lawsuit, not the criminal case, and there a 3-judge panel, including one of those judges who was appointed by Donald Trump, came together and found that Donald Trump does not have absolute presidential immunity in civil cases relating to the January 6th insurrection. They found in the Blassingame decision, the DC Circuit Court of Appeals held that Donald Trump's conduct was outside the outer perimeter of what would normally be entitled to presidential immunity, because the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that Trump's conduct was not within his Article 2 powers. It related to campaigning, it related to elections, it related to things that are not within the province of what a commander-in-chief or a United States president is supposed to do, and therefore it's not entitled to any of the immunity. And the Blassingame decision, which was decided on December 1st of 2023, was a major landmark case. And what we've always been talking about here on the Midas Touch Network is, in that civil case right there, if Donald Trump is not entitled to absolute presidential immunity in a civil case for January 6th for the insurrection as determined by the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, then clearly he should not be entitled to absolute presidential immunity in a criminal case. Clearly, criminal conduct falls outside the outer perimeter of what would traditionally be entitled to receive absolute presidential immunity. So just so you recall, this was the decision right here, December 1, 2023. You had a 3-judge panel that made this decision in the Blassingame case. You had Judge Katsas, who was actually a Trump-appointed judge who ruled against Donald Trump here. You had Srinivasan, the chief judge of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, who wrote the decision. And then you had Senior Circuit Judge Rogers also concurred. So you had all of the judges on the D.C. Circuit concurring right here. After they ruled on December 1st, Donald Trump had until February 15th if he wanted to file a petition for certiorari with the United States Supreme Court to challenge that ruling. Donald Trump blew the deadline. He missed the deadline. Whether he did that on purpose or whether it was negligent or whether it was even something worse, Trump did not file the petition for certiorari. So for now, all of these civil lawsuits against Donald Trump relating to the January 6th insurrection may proceed, and I think that's also, a significant factor that the Supreme Court should have taken into consideration regarding the determination of absolute presidential immunity in the context of criminal cases as well. If Trump is not appealing this, then why would Trump feel that there's such an urgency to appeal in any other context? You would think that you would want to bring all of those arguments together. Absolute presidential immunity in civil, absolute presidential immunity when it comes to criminal cases. Although it's, I think, a bogus argument, a frivolous argument, a meritless argument for both. Why wouldn't you bring both? Petitions for certiorari right here. Let me just read from you from the opinion here, again authored by Chief Judge Srinivasan, who says, since the Supreme Court's decision in Nixon v. Fitzgerald, presidents have carried out their official responsibilities free from any exposure to civil damages liability. Nixon, it's referring to the Nixon v. Fitzgerald case from '82, established a president's absolute immunity from civil damage claims predicated on his official acts. The object of a president's official act immunity is to assure he can fearlessly and impartially discharge the singularly weighty duties of his office. The president, though, does not spend every minute of every day exercising official responsibilities, and when he acts outside the functions of his office, he does not continue to enjoy immunity from damages liability just because he happens to be the president. Rather, as the Supreme Court made clear in Clinton v. Jones, a 1997 case, a president's official act immunity by nature does not extend to his unofficial actions. When he acts in an unofficial private capacity, he is subject to civil suits like any private citizen. This appeal calls for us to apply those key decisional precedents on presidential immunity to a decidedly unprecedented event involving the presidency, the riot at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, just as Congress convened to tabulate the Electoral College vote and declare the person elected president. The plaintiffs in the cases before us are Capitol police officers and members of Congress who were at the Capitol that day. They seek civil damages for the harms they allege they suffered arising from the riot. Although they sue various persons, the sole defendant named in all of the cases, consolidated before us, is Donald J. Trump. The plaintiffs contend that during Donald Trump's final months in office, he conspired with political allies and supporters to obtain a second term, despite his defeat in the 2020 election. He allegedly advanced that cause before January 6 by repeatedly making false claims that the election might be, and then had been stolen, filing meritless lawsuits challenging the election results and pressuring state and local officials to reverse the election outcomes in their jurisdictions. Those efforts allegedly culminated in the 75-minute speech that Donald Trump delivered at the rally on January 6th. According to the plaintiffs, Trump's actions, including ultimately his speech on January 6th, sparked the ensuing riot at the Capitol. Trump moved in the district court. It was actually before federal judge Amit Mehta. Trump moved in the district court to dismiss the claims against him, including on the grounds of official act immunity of presidents from damages liability. The district court largely rejected his claim of immunity, and Donald Trump now appeals. The sole issue before us is whether Donald Trump has demonstrated an entitlement to official act immunity for his actions leading up to and on January 6th, as alleged in the complaints. We answer no, at least at this stage of the proceedings. When a first-term president opts to seek a second term, his campaign to win re-election is not an official presidential act. The office of the presidency as an institution is agnostic about who will occupy it next, and campaigning to gain that office is not an official act of the office. So when a sitting president running for a second term attends a private fundraiser for his re-election effort, hires or fires campaign staff, cuts a political ad supporting his candidacy, or speaks at a campaign rally funded and organized by his re-election campaign committee, he is not carrying out the official duties of the presidency. He is acting as office seeker, not office holder, no less than are persons running against him when they take precisely the same action in their competing campaigns to attain precisely the same office. Trump himself recognized that he engaged in his campaign to win re-election, including his post-election efforts to alter the declared results in his favor in his personal capacity as presidential candidate, not in his official capacity as sitting president. That is evident in his efforts to intervene in the Supreme Court's consideration of a post-election lawsuit challenging the administration of the election in various battleground states. He expressly filed his motion in the Supreme Court, quote, in his personal capacity as candidate for re-election to the office of the president, rather than in his official capacity as sitting president. Goes on to say, and he grounded his claimed right to intervene in the case in his unique and substantial personal interest as a candidate for re-election to the office of president, rather than in any official interest in exercising the office's duties. In arguing that he is entitled to official act immunity in the cases before us, Trump does not dispute that he engaged in his alleged actions up to and on January 6th in his capacity as a candidate, but he thinks that does not matter. Rather, in his view, a president's speech on matters of public concern invariably an official function, and he was engaged in that. Is invariably an official function, and he was engaged in that function when he spoke at the January 6th rally and in the lead up that day. We cannot accept that rationale. While presidents are often exercising official responsibilities when they speak on matters of public concerns, that is not always the case. When a sitting president for re-election speaks in a campaign ad or in accepting his political party's nomination at the party's convention, he typically speaks on matters of public concern, yet he does so in an unofficial private capacity as office seeker, not an official capacity as office holder, and actions taken in an unofficial capacity cannot qualify for official act immunity. So Donald Trump did not appeal that order to the United States Supreme Court. He missed the February 15th deadline to appeal what I just read. Now, granted, later on, if there's a verdict that's reached, Donald Trump can go back, or on a summary judgment motion, Donald Trump later on can have the opportunity to file another appeal with the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals and then file a petition for certiorari later. But Donald Trump did not file an appeal. Now, you may be saying, why didn't he? Well, number one could be incompetence. He is represented by Alina Habba, the worst lawyer likely in American history, so that is a possibility. And Alina Habba, when she was asked during oral arguments in a case before the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, she didn't even know what the Blasingame decision was. She was like, what's that case? I've never heard of that before. It's the case involving your client, Donald Trump. But I digress. But one of the reasons Donald Trump may not have appealed that to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ruling here to the United States Supreme Court is because, again, this is yet another ruling against Donald Trump, and it was so strongly worded, and by a judge who Trump appointed, Judge Katsas, who was one of the 3 judges who ruled against Trump. Perhaps Trump didn't want to bring this to the Supreme Court because he was worried that the Supreme Court would ultimately consolidate both, and Trump would lose on both rather than just losing on one, or that by bringing this to the Supreme Court, the fact that you had two, not the Supreme Court is going to just ignore that the DC Circuit made this ruling in Blassingame. Like, they're clearly aware of this decision, but perhaps Donald Trump just said, look, I just want to make my argument in the criminal case. I'm not focused on the civil case. If I show that I've lost twice to the Supreme Court, they're going to know that this whole absolute presidential immunity argument I'm making is doubly frivolous, right? Like, if I lost immunity in the civil context, then how am I going to argue even in the criminal context? Clearly, I should not be entitled to it in the criminal context if I wasn't entitled to it in the civil context of Blassingame. But nonetheless, Trump missed the deadline. The floodgates are open now. Anybody who wanted to sue Donald Trump within the statute of limitations period for conduct relating to the January 6th insurrection can do so. He did not file the petition for cert with the Supreme Court. Very interesting development indeed.
It is Tuesday, the 20th of February of 2024, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she's a little under the weather right at this very moment, so we will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. It always has, and it always will. Alrighty, well, we took our little Precious to the vet yesterday and gave her, or she got a general checkup and checked out her teeth, so this next Monday, I will be taking her in quite early, and it will be an all-day procedure, meaning that they'll have to knock her out, and they're going to remove 2 teeth and then, of course, clean the rest. So she's got an abscess, and that would not, she's not going to feel well with that. And the vet said that he didn't want to give her antibiotics because that might prove to be worse for an infection at this point than just getting the abscess cleaned out and those teeth taken care of. So we're going to do that. Though in the process, one of the issues of small dogs is that they have issues with their legs. And the kneecaps tend to get out of a line, so they're out of that groove. If you don't know, there's a groove that the kneecap actually fits in, and when it maneuvers itself out of that, it doesn't feel good. And I know because I've had issues with my kneecaps being out of alignment before, and it doesn't feel good. And getting them back into place doesn't feel good either. Ooh. And I'll tell you, sports medicine guys that have to do that work, they don't like it either because it's hard work. And, you got to do it with really strong fingers and stuff. And so the poor little girl's got these issues with her legs. And so after her teeth are taken care of, which could take a couple of months in terms of follow-up and making sure that there's no infection and everything's, moving along as it should, we will start the procedure of repairing these issues with her legs. So she has been a little, I've noticed, unsteady at times. I thought it was because maybe of our slick floors, and every now and then her back end would sort of give way, and she'd, move her feet like one of those cartoon animals that are trying to go fast and don't get anywhere. And kind of concerned me, so I'd pick her up and put her in place, and she'd toddle off. But now it's because, now I know it's because of her issue. And so she's been in pain. And now dogs have a pretty good way of hiding pain. And so I knew she wasn't feeling too well anyway, generally. But the doctor did give her some, or sent some pain medicine home with me, that little liquid stuff that I give to her for a 7-pound dog. She needs to lose some weight, too. So he says, anyway, with a small, tiny syringe, and she seemed to have not been adverse to me giving it to her. We'll see how it happens tonight when I give it to her again. But it's not as if she got pinned to the couch, but she hasn't left the couch. She's moved a little bit, in her usual spots. So we'll see how it goes. I sat with her a bit. She seems a little loopy. Poor little thing. So we'll just keep monitoring that, and hopefully everything will turn out as we want it to be, because we don't want our friends to suffer, and we want them to be alive. Oh, that's the other thing, is I'm not really supposed to allow her to jump up and down and run around. So we'll see how that goes. Because when they go out to pee, sometimes they like to run around the perimeter of the property, chasing kids and other dogs getting walked in the neighborhood. So what are you going to do? Well, we'll try to keep an eye on her and try to keep her from jumping up and down and running around. Okay, try doing that with a dog. Alrighty, what do we have in store for you here as we begin this fabulous Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays? Well, at the top, that was the Media's Touch, pointing out how Trump missed a major deadline with the Supreme Court. And that's what happens when, your pretty lawyer fakes being smart. Okay. I mean, she says she's pretty, and she's faking being smart. I'm just, giving her due as she's described herself. So, hey, she wants to be that way. Let her. On the rest of the menu, the West Virginia House of Delegates passed a bill allowing the prosecution of librarians. That's right. Somebody might not like My Little Pony. The Oregon House of Representatives passed a bill to tighten up a law to crack down on child labor violations. Not only that, apparently there's some obscure law, and we'll get into it when we get into it, but an obscure law that allows a refund of penalties given back to the perps who have violated child labor violations, only if the feds are involved. Okay. And the Republican-controlled Missouri House of Representatives voted to ban celebratory gunfire less than a week after the Chiefs parade shooting. Well, I don't think that shooting was celebratory, but at least they've done something to rein in guns. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where French mayors face violence and intimidation from, guess who? Xenophobic far-right groups. And Argentina's poverty levels under President Javier Milei skyrocketed to 57% of the population, a 20-year high in January. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page to the left from that chat room link, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. It really does help us put a big dent in our bills. So thank you for your generosity, for those of you out there who have recently joined our patronage, and also to those of you who have increased your monthly patronage. It really does help. Thank you. Let's see. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, etc., even Facebook, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those, though we all take care of Facebook, just so you know. You can follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, Instagram, Tumblr, Facebook, yada, yada. At Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime, so that you can read the actual reportage from the actual reporters. And if you follow my social media feeds, you'll have quick access to those show notes and links diaries, because I put a link to those show notes and links diaries as a link in my social media feeds. So do it. You can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, really wherever podcasts can be found. Even on Audible now. We are on Audible. Yeah. Alrighty. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the Parkersburg News and Sentinel. Parkersburg News and Sentinel, and the reporter is Stephen Allen Adams. The West Virginia House of Delegates debated the merits of removing protections from public librarians and school librarians from criminal prosecution in the off chance a minor encounters books and content some consider to be obscene. You know, some people consider the Bible to be obscene, and they've even banned it because it was obscene. I'm just letting you know. So if they think that, what are they going to do with My Little Pony? They got a rainbow in that cartoon book. The House passed Bill 4654, removing bona fide schools, public libraries, and museums from the list of exemptions from criminal liability relating to distribution and display to a minor of obscene matter. You know, like one of those still lifes with cavemen and cave women in furry furs, sexually draped along their bodies. I'm not going to let my kids see that. No, we're not. So in a 82-12 vote, they sent the bill to the state Senate. HB 4654 would lift criminal liability exemptions from schools in the presentation of local or state-approved curriculum and public libraries and museums displaying obscene matter to a minor when the child is not accompanied by a parent or guardian. State code defines obscene matter as anything an average person believes depicts or describes sexually explicit conduct, nudity, sex, or certain bodily functions, or anything a reasonable person would find lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Well, we already know that they don't consider a call to arms to have literary value. Where is this going? We know exactly where it's going. We cannot allow Nazi book burning under the guise of banning. Because what they're doing now is they've gone way past burning books. They are now going to burn librarians. Tournay from Investigate West brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. In 2020, a Ford dealership located in the suburb of Portland, Oregon, settled with the U.S. Department of Labor for nearly $28,000 over reported violations of federal child labor law. Federal investigators had learned that 6 workers aged 16 and 17 were performing prohibited tasks as lot attendants at Landmark Ford in Tigard, including operating trash compactors. One teen was injured when he was thrown backwards into a tailgate while riding in the bed of a pickup truck. State investigators with Oregon's Bureau of Labors and Industries also scrutinized the dealership and levied a penalty for the company's failure to obtain a required certificate to employ minors. But unlike federal investigators, the State Bureau did not investigate any of the safety violations or issue fines for them. Because of the federal penalties, the state would not have been able to keep any of the money from the fine issued to the dealership. The case is an example of a long-standing quirk in Oregon law that requires the agency to refund child labor penalties if an employer also faces federal penalties for the same violations. The restrictions do not apply to any other type of labor investigation besides child labor. As a result, dozens of times over the last 2 decades, the Bureau has declined to investigate employers who were also under federal investigation for child labor, state labor officials said. They are now asking lawmakers to turn them loose. In testimony before the state legislature's House Business and Labor Committee in January, Labor Commissioner Christina Stephenson said, "The status quo gives bad actors a competitive edge and can, in effect, make the state a comparably attractive place to break the law. You might even come over to Oregon to do your violations if Oregon is the one where you get half off on your penalties for child labor violations," she said. Oregon lawmakers may change that in this year's legislative session. House Bill 4004 or 4004 passed unanimously by the Oregon House on February 14th. Oh, St. Valentine's Day. And it would empower the Labor Bureau to both pursue and retain penalties that employers pay for child labor violations, even in cases where federal labor officials are also involved. The bill is now in the Senate. Fortunately, we've passed a law that has been held up in the courts that anybody leaving the state to prevent a quorum to be able to pass legislation like this cannot run again. And hopefully that'll be enough to keep the Republicans in the chamber, because I know right now there are people already complaining that our child labor laws are too strict. Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Missouri's Republican-led House on Monday yesterday passed a bill to ban celebratory gunfire in cities. And that's less than a week after the deadly shooting at the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl parade that left some attending lawmakers hiding in bathrooms. Kansas City police have said the shooting appeared to stem from a dispute between several people and not celebratory gunfire. One woman was killed and 22 people were injured. About half of the injured people were under the age of 16. But the largely bipartisan supported bill on celebrity gunfire represents a rare effort to regulate guns in a state with some of the most expansive laws on firearm ownership. Already, emotional Republicans and Democrats used yesterday's debate on the measure to fight over the best way to address last week's shooting and gun violence more broadly. Kansas City Democratic Representative Patty Lewis spoke through tears as she described hiding in an alcove to avoid being trampled. What made me most sad was fear that nothing was going to happen, Lewis said, referencing the state gun laws. I've seen it happen over and over. Republican Representative Ben Baker spoke against reacting emotionally to the shooting as Democrats shouted at him from across the House floor. There's always a call for strict gun laws. It's almost the immediate reaction by many in this body when something like this happens, but the fact is, Baker said, no law that we could pass in this body would have prevented the terrible tragedy that happened last week. Oh, you don't think keeping the guns out of the hands of kids, long guns, AR-15s, I'll tell you what happens every time we have a mass shooting. These guys come out as ghouls and say, you shouldn't be upset. Lawmakers shortly after voted 120 to 26 to make shooting a firearm within city limits a misdemeanor for the first offense with exceptions. Well, I guess it's a small step, microscopic, but it's a step nonetheless. All right, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Imagine for a moment that you're a very hungry bird soaring over 30-foot ocean swells and high winds with no land for thousands of miles. How do you know where you're going? Well, if you're a wandering albatross, you listen. According to a new finding in October's Proceedings of the National Association of Sciences USA, this seabird navigates using sounds below our thresholds for hearing. For Science Quickly, I'm Joseph Polidoro. The wandering albatross thrives in the circumpolar band of ocean north of Antarctica, a windswept region that the world's best sailors say has the most inhospitable seas on the planet. On the Southern Ocean's islands where they nest and brood, one wandering albatross parent tends the nest while its partner takes to the sea, traveling as much as 10,000 kilometers as it forages for scattered prey. The bird must eat enough to fuel its turn on the nest, which can be a long time.
Birds might go for perhaps a minimum of 4 or 5 days, right the way through to up to 30 days.
Samantha Patrick is a marine ecologist at the University of Liverpool in England and a co-author of the study. Wandering albatrosses actually gain weight on these long trips because they're extremely efficient flyers.
If you've seen an albatross, it almost never beats its wings. It's quite fascinating to see them flying in the wind. When they're flying, their heartbeat is the same as when they're resting.
That's Sophie de Grissac, an ornithologist and a researcher at the French National Museum of Natural History in Paris, who wasn't involved in the study. With their long wingspan, the longest of any bird, maxing out at 12 feet, wandering albatrosses use wind, air pressure gradients, and gravity above the swells and waves to soar for thousands of miles, reaching top speeds of 45 miles an hour. Basically, wandering albatrosses don't fly, they soar.
And the more distance you cover, the more you may find food.
The wandering albatross's keen senses of sight and smell help it locate prey. But these senses are good for about 100 kilometers, a distance the bird can travel in as little as an hour and a half. So how does the albatross know where to soar toward?
There does seem to be this really large gap in information that they're able to access.
A clue came in a chance encounter on the way to the Crozet Islands, part of the French Southern and Antarctic territories, where Samantha was headed to study albatrosses.
On the same vessel were some researchers from the UN, and they were going to work with the hydrophone station that's used there. And that hydrophone station is used to monitor nuclear tests, and it also gathers infrasound data, like the data that we had freely available to us. And we came up with the question of whether seabirds could use infrasound. And it was clear that no one had really thought about this before or looked into it before, and that's where the idea for the project came from.
Infrasound is any sound below 20 hertz, where human hearing starts to drop off. At the very low end of the infrasound spectrum are microbaroms, very low-frequency sounds between 0.1 and 0.6 hertz that are detectable across thousands of miles.
Microbaroms are generated by the collision of ocean waves.
Natasha Gillies is a seabird ecologist at the University of Liverpool and a co-author of the study. The constant hum of microbarom infrasound is called the voice of the sea. It's present everywhere, all the time, but it's unevenly distributed.
Where you have more energy in the ocean system because you have wavier areas or windy areas, then you get louder microbarom regions.
Ideal soaring conditions for wandering albatrosses.
But it also gives them information about standing ocean waves. And this is often caused by things like storms. So it would enable birds to try and gauge where storms are, potentially. And so this might be because they want to move towards windier areas that could be optimal, or they might want to move away from windy areas if they're too strong and they want to try and avoid storms.
Directly testing this apex predator's hearing is not an option. So Natasha and her colleagues arrived at a creative experimental solution. Get a large enough sample of wandering albatross flight paths, then, using wind and infrasound data, create a sound map of the total flight area, a map of microbaroms across space and time. Send out another set of albatrosses equipped with sensors to field check the sound map, and finally overlay the bird's flight paths on the sound map.
So essentially what we can get is if you put an albatross at point X in space and on this day and time, what infrasound would it be likely to hear and experience?
We didn't have an expectation at the beginning that they would move towards louder or quieter areas.
What the team found is that wandering albatrosses aren't exactly wandering. Instead, they seem to use microbaroms to head toward ideal wind conditions.
Looking at the soundscape and how the birds move, almost following this wave of sound. I found that beautiful. My name is Francesco Ventura, and I'm a postdoc at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution.
He wasn't involved in the study either.
It's another world. That's the thing. It's something that we cannot fully understand, I think, because we are humans and we cannot even imagine how that would work for us. But it seemed to be working fine for them because they've been doing it for a long time. They seem to be able of reading what's going on and of kind of orienting towards that. That's something that is it's sci-fi.
We know that there is something about infrasound that they want to move towards, that they like, that is beneficial to them in some way.
It was kind of a badly needed paper at this point because it sheds some new light into a fundamental question that is at the core of a lot of marine megafauna research in general, but also at the core of seabird research, which is how do they manage to find food in such a vast area?
This reliance on infrasound may actually extend to other species too.
Most seabirds are highly dependent on wind for movement. It seems to be involved in animal behavior in a lot of contexts and a lot of different species.
They include whales, elephants, pigeons, and peacocks.
So I would be very surprised if this was in any way unique to wandering albatrosses.
So albatrosses had a very long time to evolve ways of feeling the environment, lots of way they can perceive what's around them. And I think because they really need this condition, this stormy condition, these winds, and so on, it makes perfect sense that they would have evolved more than one way of finding them.
I think it's a really nice reminder of the different sources of information animals might be using, especially in this sort of environment that is so featureless, and how animals can still extract so much information and context out of that, despite there seemingly not being much there.
Evolution in animals is almost always very surprising. When we study evolution and when you study animal closely, you find remarkable things, remarkable inventions.
Science Quickly is produced by Tulika Bose and Jeff Delvecchio. Our music is composed by Dominic Smith. Subscribe to Science Quickly wherever you get your podcasts. If you like the show, give us a rating or review. For Science Quickly, I'm Joseph Polidoro.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage, because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by and for the people. Election security experts warned the country's secretaries of state to take immediate steps to harden their election systems in both cities and rural precincts, and to prepare for cyber and AI election interference from both foreign and domestic bad actors. Stateline News reports that representatives from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, and the Criminal Cyber Response and Services Branch of the FBI spoke at the winter meetings of the National Associations of Secretaries of State and State Election Directors. Attendees were warned of a heightened risk of election interference using cyber attacks from U.S. adversaries, including Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. This includes the possibility of attacks on election and other infrastructure, including ransomware attacks. Fulton County, Georgia experienced such an attack in early January. CISA announced a new webpage last week called Protect 2024, making recommendations to states and municipalities on hardening infrastructure. Concerns were also raised about AI, which could make it easier to trick voters with misinformation, such as the fake Biden robocall in New Hampshire, or targeting legal immigrant citizens in their languages. All this in addition to continued threats of violence to election officials from homegrown domestic extremists. We have links to the Stateline News article at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal. Find us on Facebook at American Democracy Minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1805. That was the day that abolitionist and women's rights advocate Angelina Grimke was born. Her parents were slaveholders and among the wealthiest in Charleston, South Carolina. As a young woman, she denounced slavery and together with her sister Sarah, moved north to Philadelphia to join the Quakers. There she became a teacher and grew frustrated with how the Quakers approached abolitionism. She quickly gravitated towards radical abolitionists like William Lloyd Garrison and became active in the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society. She became prominent in abolitionist circles in 1830 1835, after Garrison published her letter condemning pro-slavery riots in Boston. The next year, she published an open letter to Southern women demanding they condemn the institution of slavery. Angelina and Sarah embarked on abolitionist speaking tours and the organizing of women's anti-slavery societies. Having grown up in the South, the Grimke sisters held a special authority among Northern abolitionists. They could testify to the severity and inhumanity of the slave system. They did so in the book American Slavery as It Is, written together with Angelina's husband, abolitionist Theodore Well. Controversy intensified against Angelina and her sister as their popularity grew. Religious leaders and abolitionists alike bristled at the idea of women engaging in public speaking and political work. Undeterred, the sisters defended their right to be on equal footing with men in the abolitionist movement. Harriet Beecher Stowe's sister Catherine, a leading educator, was among those who decried women's public activism. Angelina responded that all humans are moral beings worthy of human rights regardless of gender. Her response served as an early contribution to the women's rights movement of the 19th century.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is pretty cloudy this morning with temperatures right currently at 44 degrees Fahrenheit. A few showers throughout the day with overcast skies later in the afternoon. Highs in the upper 50s. Winds out of the south at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Considerable cloudiness overnight with occasional showers throughout the night and early morning, bringing with it almost a quarter of an inch of rain. Winds will be light and variable. Then considerable cloudiness tomorrow, Wednesday, with occasional rain showers. Highs in the low to mid 50s. Winds light and variable. Looks like pollen is still rated as none here in our little hamlet of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 21 parts per million. And that daytime UV index is low and it's ticked down to level 1. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.91 inches. Visibility is at 7 miles and relative humidity is at 92%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 54 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 50 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 62 and partly cloudy. Bagram is 30 degrees and clear. Kiev is 30 degrees with light snow. Hong Kong is 76 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 55 and merely cloudy. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 70 degrees and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 55 with showers in the vicinity, and they continue to be under a flood watch. Chicago, Illinois is 48 degrees and sunny. And New York, New York is a brisk 35 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Stanley of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. The mayor of a small resort town on the Atlantic coast of France resigned, closed his medical practice, and moved away after his house and 2 cars were set on fire. The arson followed months of death threats over plans to relocate a refugee center near a school. More than 150 miles to the north, trouble visited another mayor when he decided to take in a handful of refugee families. The aim was to fill job vacancies in the village. Instead, he received a torrent of abuse. One threat read, "I hope, Mr. Mayor, that your wife will be raped, your daughter will be raped, and your grandchildren sodomized." Oh, how nice. Now, these were not isolated incidents. Mayors, normally among the most appreciated elected officials in France, are under attack as never before. Opposition to immigration is a driving force, led by small extreme right groups that are often backed by national politicians. You know, like brown shirts. While other European countries, including Germany, Sweden, Italy, and Spain, have seen protests over similar issues, the backlash against mayors is especially jarring in France. The French have traditionally revered state institutions. A small-town mayor embodies the value of the French Republic, harking back to the Revolution of 1789. The tactic used against French mayors in recent years go beyond the usual street protests and angry public meetings. They include violence and disinformation, and local demonstrations are often amplified by outside agitators. In France, like elsewhere in Europe, national identity has become a war cry for far-right political groups. They promote the idea that foreigners are stealing the riches of the nation through state handouts, and that they will ultimately upend France's traditional way of life. Sound familiar? France's Internal Security Agency, the DGSI, is increasingly worried about fringe movements and their potential for violence both on the far right and the far left. Got to get both sides in there, you know. The far-right groups become more active after deadly attacks by Islamic extremists in 2015 and 2016. I wouldn't consider Islamic extremists left-wing, but here we go. One of their goals is to precipitate a clash over those viewed as outsiders. Then DGSI Chief Nicholas Lerner said in a rare interview in Le Monde last year, the normalization of a recourse to violence and the temptation to want to impose ideas through fear or intimidation is a grave danger to our democracies, he said. The violent views of the radical right in the U.S. have spread to Europe and been amplified through social media, Lerner said. Topics debated by political parties like migration tend to channel that energy.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Almudena Calatrava of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Poverty levels skyrocketed to 57.4% of Argentina's 46 million people in January, the highest rate in 20 years, according to a study by the Catholic University of Argentina. The findings quickly unleashed accusations between Argentina's former vice president, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, and the government of President Javier Milei, who came to power, announcing a series of shock measures aimed at tackling the country's severe crisis. About 27 million people in Argentina are poor, and 15% of those are mired in destitution, meaning they cannot adequately cover their food needs, according to the study released over the weekend. The UCA Social Debt Observatory is considered an independent and prestigious research space whose reports on poverty cover a larger geographical area than those conducted by Argentina's National Statistic Agency, INDEC, otherwise known as INDEC. It also applies a methodology that addresses the problem with a more multidimensional approach, and its findings are seldom questioned by politicians and economists. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.